are continuing our I Think I Can, or I Think God Can series, where we were talking about self-efficacy and the things that we think we can do, the things that we know God can do. And so as we talk about this morning, I want to ask a question. Do we think that impossible things are possible? Do we think that God can do the impossible things? Do we think impossible things in our world happen? Well, when I think about that story, that idea. I'm thinking about things such as earlier in our century, in our lifespan, people didn't think the car was going to be possible. They thought, horse and buggy does fine. It's going to do the thing. Roads are just impossible for cars to drive on, and of course, where are we today, right? Who here came in a car? All right. That one time they thought that train travel was going to be impossible. Train travel was it was too much. It was too powerful. There was letters written that going 25 miles an hour was too fast. The human body just couldn't take it. And now train travel is everywhere, right? They're improving it faster than anything. And my wife goes to school in a train, every day. All right. At one point, people thought that air travel was impossible. Man will never fly. It's just not possible. And then, of course, after the Wright brothers, right, we have air travel everywhere. How many people have taken a plane this year? We take plane trips all the time, right? We have a pilot amongst us, who's not here today, but he flies on regular. The idea that impossible things happen around us all the time seems to me that we don't really have a good sense of what is impossible versus what is possible, right? We don't seem to have a sense of that. And so when we come to our story today that we're going to be talking about, we see in Matthew chapter 14 that Jesus is about to do something impossible. Something that is impossible. If we look at chapter 14, verse 22, we start our story after Jesus has fed the 5,000. And it says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when he came about evening, he was there alone. And so we see this scene set up for just a second. Is that he sent the disciples out already. So he told them to go. He told them to go out by boat. Now, if I'm a disciple of Jesus and we're traveling together, I'm kind of wondering, why is it that you're not coming with us? Like, we have to come back and get you? Are you going to walk all the way around the lake and we're just going to wait for you on the other side? I'm not really seeing a whole lot of instruction from Jesus on what to do once they get there. So, are they just going to sit there on the other side of the, and just sit in the boat and just wait for Jesus? It's like there's a lot of uncertainty that we see in this command from Jesus to go on without him. And yet I think that Jesus knows what's about to happen, right? I mean, I think Jesus knows what he's about to do, which is he's going to be walking on water. Spoiler alert. But with that, okay, when Jesus knows what he's about to do, I think it's that he trusts fully in what he's about to do. He trusts fully in the fact that he can walk on water. This isn't some guy who's like, you know what, you guys go ahead and maybe I'll just walk across water. I might be able to do that one. He knows full well, I'm going to be able to walk right up to you guys on that boat. He is fully convinced of that ability. And here we see, if we continue on this, verse 24, it says, But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, It is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. Now, when we think about this idea of what's just happened in this scene, there's a lot of things, all right? We just kind of pass by that idea that Jesus was walking on the sea, right? We seem to just pass by that like, okay, no big deal. No worries. Jesus was walking on water, people. Okay. Do you walk on water? I don't walk on water. Jesus was walking on water. And for the guys who are watching this in the boat, for the disciples who are watching there, it is the middle of the night and the wind is blowing. It is a hard traverse trail that they're on, okay? They are at a point where it's probably pitch black. It is pitch black, I'm sure.
And they're sitting there, and the waves are there, and here comes Jesus walking up on there. Now, I just want to take a pause and think about this idea of being out in the middle of the sea in the dark for a second. We remember the storm we had just a couple weeks ago. How many people lost power? Did you lose power? Most of you? Yeah. I was here at this building when we lost power. Now, I don't like being in this building at night anyway by my lonesome. This building is kind of creepy. And, I'm usually here like well past dark, which is about 4 o'clock these days. And it gets kind of spooky when it's dark and I can't see the end of this hallway or that one, and I have to walk by it, and I just wonder, is there an axe murderer just waiting to run at me? It happens, right? The mind just goes there, okay? Well, when the storm happened and it all went dark, this building went from going to being dark to being like advanced darkness. It was just, there was not a light to be had. There was no source of light whatsoever. It was creepy. I'll say that much. I got out of there as soon as humanly possible. I was very freaked out. And so I can just imagine these men sitting on this boat in the middle of the storm, and it's windy, and it is pitch black, and you already are imagining what monster might come up from the bottom of the sea at you, right? You're already imagining what horrors will await you. And yet here is this figure that's just walking on the water, okay? Walking on the water. You know what? People don't do that. People don't normally do that. And so when they come out and they say, it's a ghost, can any of you really blame them for that conclusion? For that conclusion that there's this ghost coming up at them? I don't. I mean, honestly, I'd say, you should have been more afraid. Like, what are we going to do about this? But Jesus calls out to them, and he says, take heart. It is I. All right, and in this point, right, we see that Jesus, in fact, it's kind of funny because if you read the Mark version in chapter 6:48, Jesus actually intended to walk by them at this point. So I can only imagine, Jesus kind of walking by, watching them struggle, having the heart, and it's like, I'm just, see you later. That's Jesus' intent there. But he tells them, and once they saw him, he's like, okay, all right, don't be afraid. It's just me. And so as we can understand their conclusions, then we come to Peter's reaction. All right, so it's not just that, they're all afraid and everything. Peter is a special kind of disciple, all right? Peter is in the good ways and in the bad ways, all the same. But Peter's reaction here, if we look in verse 28, says, and Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. And so Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. So let's just pause for a second. We know the story is going to go sideways in a minute, but let's just pause and admire Peter for a minute. All right, admire the fact that he is so trusting of Jesus. And he says, man, if it is you, Jesus, if it is you who has come back to me, who's coming out to us and walking on the water, if you tell me to come out there, I'm going to go out there. If it's you, I know that I can do this too. And so he gets out of the boat and he walks on the water. Okay, again, do you do that? No, we don't do that. Peter walks on the water with Jesus for just a minute, and he walks on water, and he's going out to Jesus. And that takes a brand of faith. Okay? That takes a brand of faith that I don't know that I possess. I don't know that if Jesus was walking on water towards me, I would have said, hey, you tell me to come out there and I'll do it too. I would have just been more like, really? You can do that? That's crazy, right? Okay, but anyway, so he walks out on the water towards Jesus, and in verse 30 it says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to slink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, and saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Okay, so we see Peter goes out on the water, and he trusts Jesus enough, and he says, if you tell me to do this, I know I can do it, because you told me I can do it. And as he's walking out towards Jesus, he starts getting distracted. And he's looking to the side, and he sees the waves, and he feels the wind, and he's like, people don't do this. What do I think I'm doing here? This isn't normal. And he starts sinking. And again, that's where his faith takes doubt, and it takes a shaking, that his faith doesn't hold him firm to Jesus, and Jesus saves him. And they continue and they walk back to the boat. All right, so we almost gloss over that. Peter starts sinking. We gloss over the fact that Jesus saves him, and then they walk back to the boat. As he continues to walk on water until they get back to the boat. But Jesus's question here is the important part, right? Why is it that you doubted? You of little faith. Is this an angry question? Or is this a disappointed question? Is this a question that is a rebuke and harsh of Peter, or is it there to bring Peter about to a realization? Not entirely sure of that. I certainly don't think it's a throwaway question. Jesus doesn't ask this question in vain. He doesn't ask this question and just, hey, you doubter, how dare you doubt? It's a, why is it that you doubted? Why was there doubt in your mind that this could be done? Where, your faith it took a beating for that. And so the question as he asks this, the question is, he's digging at the root. What is it about you that doubted? What is there that's going on that caused you the doubt? And so when Peter professes this question to Peter, when he says this question to Peter, the question then really should be able to pertain to us is, why is it that we doubt? Why do we have doubts at times is the question. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and started looking at the things around him. He started looking at the things he could see, and the world around him expressed a message that was different than what Jesus told him. And he started to believe the message that the world told him, which is, these are big waves, this is hard wind, and people don't walk on water. Those are the things that Peter saw, and decided to trust in those things over Jesus, even with the evidence that I'm literally walking on water. I'm literally walking on water, and all of these things are telling me that I can't do that. And so he goes around, he fails at that. And when we think about why we doubt, right, we tend to doubt God because we see messages that we believe over what God tells us. We see things and think, that's too much for God to do. God can't handle that. God can't handle those things over there. Maybe he'll come through for me over here, but I don't know that I believe he'll come through for me. Like, I know God can do that, but I don't think he will do that. I don't think God works that way sometimes. Like we all those messages that cause and seed doubt throughout our faith, that when we are going before him, when we profess and trying to trust in him, all these things that cause us to really not believe that God will do the things he says he will. That God won't come through, even if we believe he can, we don't believe he will. And that's really, when we think about our doubt, we should ask ourselves that same question. Why is it that I am doubting in God? What is it about what's going on with me that's causing me this doubt? And I think that's what Jesus is trying to bring to Peter. And I think that's what we really need to be able to address when we have our own faults, when we have our own failings of faith. And so when we see in the story of Peter, after this moment, we still see doubt in Peter. We look at Matthew chapter 26. We see that as Jesus is being tried, that Peter is outside. In verse 69, he says, "Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, 'You also were with Jesus the Galilean.' But he denied it before them all, saying, 'I do not know what you mean.' And when he went out in the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, 'This man was with Jesus of Nazareth.' And again he denied it with an oath, 'I do not know the man.' And after a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, 'Certainly, you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you.' Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know the man.' And immediately the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and he wept bitterly." And so Peter still has this struggle of doubt, almost like the walking on water moment was a practice for him. And it was a practice for him in this moment that he should be working on this sense of doubt. And yet in this sense of doubt, he still fails by denying Jesus. He denies Jesus because he doesn't think that God can come through with him if he pronounces that he knows Jesus and he's one of his disciples. He's seeing Jesus has been caught. He's on trial for his life, and it's a rigged trial at that. He sees that all the disciples are scattered. I don't know where anybody else is. I'm all by myself. And if I confess that I know Jesus, I might be dragged right into that room too. And he sees all of these things out there that say it is not safe for me to profess Jesus. And so I'm going to believe that truth that I should deny Jesus over pronouncing that I know him and I'm a faithful disciple. All those messages are seated within Peter, that he therefore goes and he denies Christ. And it's more serious than walking on water, than performing an impossible feat like walking on water. This is denying Christ in a moment when he really needs to be able to step up and say, yes, I know Christ, and I'm with Christ. And so with that, again, Peter recognizes it. The moment that he recognizes what he does, he weeps for it. And he's certainly saddened by it because he knows the depths of what he has done by denying Christ. But that's not the end of his story either, right? It's not the end of his story. Thank God it's not the end of his story. If you look over at John chapter 21, we see this final moment as far as Peter and Jesus. And so they go out to fish. And in chapter 21, verse 1, it says, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. And Simon Peter Thomas called the twin Nathanael of Cana in Galilee. The sons of Zebedee and the two others of the disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. All right, so this is where Peter's at, right? I don't know, really, if we think about kind of Peter's journey from the denial and the recognizing of the denial to Jesus being raised and that whole episode where he saw Jesus and where he saw the empty tomb. And now we're at this point at the sea where Peter's just like, I'm just going to get up and go fishing. I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to go fishing. I'm going to go back to what I know. I've known it all my life. I'm going to go do that. And so Peter goes out and he goes fishing and they catch nothing. And as they catch nothing, this is what it says in verse 4. It says, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus, and said to them, children, have you caught any fish? And they answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. And so they got this help from Jesus, and they were able to recognize again that Jesus is there, this great haul of fish. And this is the interesting point to me, because they recognize it's Jesus, and Peter does something really, really strange. All right? And it's important because we know his story, why he does this really, really strange thing, but he does something really strange. So listen to this. He says, so it says in verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Why do you think Peter did that? All right, you think about this idea, right? Is that when you're stripped for work and you're on the boat and you're going to go into the sea to go get to the shore, it's like, showering with your clothes on. Do you put your clothes on to take a shower? Do you throw your clothes on to go swimming? I think Peter was already dressed for going for a swim, wasn't he, by being stripped for work? And yet he throws his clothes on so he can go into the sea and he can go to Jesus. I'm pretty sure that Peter had a thought in his mind that I'm going to walk on water. It's Jesus. I did it once before. All I have to do is go out and do that. And so Peter gets out there and he walks on, or goes into the sea, swims to the Lord. And it says the other disciples came in the boat, verse 8, dragging the net full of fish, and they were not far from the land. But about 100 yards off, when they got out of the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, and with the fish laid out on it and the bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many that the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. And this was now the third time that Jesus revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And so Peter is confronted with not only his doubts, but he's confronted with the Lord past those doubts that Jesus really is all that he said he would be, right? All that he said he was, all that and more. And Peter's confronted with that. And so when we get to this idea, I think that Peter is in a point, he's really in an unstable point, I think. He is in a situation where he is hopeful. He knows, man, Jesus has come back, and Jesus is able to do things, and I don't even know what that all means yet. I don't know what that means, that Jesus is raised from the dead. But I think that Peter's at a point where, he knows what he's done to Jesus. He knows that he's denied him, and yet he's hopeful that Jesus can do something even about that. I think Peter is at a highly hopeful point that things can go back to the way they were, that things can happen the way they had done before. And while that's not what Peter's about to get, Jesus does something for Peter here that is highly important. It says this in verse 15. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." And he said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Tend my sheep." And he said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." And this he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." And so Jesus does, he reinstates Peter through this. This is a reinstatement. You denied me 3 times. I'm giving you 3 opportunities to profess me, right? To profess that you love me. This is a reaffirmation, a reestablishing of Peter's love and his devotion as a disciple. And so Peter is given this confirmation through this action that again, it sets him up for the rest of his life as a disciple. It sets him up to be able to journey forward in his faith in Christ without doubts over where his relationship with Jesus is. Over, did I make a mistake so broad in denying him that I can't be redeemed, that I can't be forgiven, that I can't come back from that? And so he gives Peter some reassurance. And so when we think about the ideas here, when we're talking about the impossible things, we tend to look at Jesus and the impossible things and we think, man, the impossible thing is that he walked on water, is that he did something that no human can do. He did something that's physically impossible. And the more that we look at these things, the more impossible it seems. But the impossible thing that Jesus really does here is assure Peter's doubts. He assures Peter through the hardest times of his life of whether he actually is good with the Lord God Almighty. He assures him of his relationship and that he is going to go forward with purpose in that relationship. And when we think impossible things, we need to think about the things, not just the physical wonders of the miracles. We need to think about the glory and wonder of our relationship with God. And God is able to affirm and assure us through our doubts. And our doubts that we have, that God can bring us forward, just like Peter, to a place where I can feel confident about going forward and assuring myself. Well, let's look at Matthew chapter 11 for a second. Matthew chapter 11, verse 30. Jesus says this after there's kind of a long amounts of stories, which is all about unfaithful people, unfaithful and unbelieving, and the struggle to believe who Jesus is. And you know this verse. It says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And Jesus says this. We tend to look at this verse and say, yeah, be a Christian. It's not that bad. It's actually a lot better. Life is better. But Jesus is saying this statement that my yoke is easy and my burden is light when he's talking about the struggle to believe who Jesus is. The struggle to deal with the burden of proof of who Jesus is, the struggle to believe that Jesus really did come down as God's own Son to die on the cross, to be raised so that we might be able to be raised to newness of life. That burden is not so hard for us to believe. And Jesus is saying that is not so hard for us. And I want us to see that as we look at the idea of that burden, that we also play a part in that burden. We play a part in being able to relieve each other of that burden. If you look at Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. And I want us to read this together. Galatians 6:2, if you have it. It says, bear one another's burdens. Read it with me. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Let's read that again. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. You may be in a good place right now. You may be able to say, hey, I believe in Jesus. I believe in my salvation. I believe in my relationship, and I'm solid with that. But I guarantee you that not everybody in this room, not everybody in the kingdom is so assured. And you might come and find yourself at a place where you don't feel so assured. That's the ups and downs of living as a Christian. It's the ups and downs of how we do it. And so I think that as we are called to recognize that the burden of Christ is easy, that the yoke is light, that we are supposed to, in the same fashion, carry that burden. When we think about the burden that Peter carried, the burden of doubt on whether Jesus really is Jesus who is right in front of me, and I don't know that I can trust him fully in all those things. I don't know that, and I'm too scared to pronounce him in moments when it seems hard. The burden that Peter carried, all right, Jesus lifts that burden by reaffirming him and reestablishing him to go forward as his disciple. We have the same burden of, am I really able to walk with Christ? Am I really good enough? Can I really be someone who has purpose in Christ? Is my relationship really solid enough? Am I going to be cast out because of that sin or that problem or this doubt or this whatever fear that I might have? We are burdened with those kinds of things, and it's our responsibility to carry that burden for each other. It's our responsibility, like Christ. Do you love Christ? Then do what he told you to do. Do what he commanded. It is our responsibility to bring people back to Christ with that reaffirming spirit. And so the impossible thing is not walking on water. It's not healing the sick. It's not raising the dead. For us, the impossible thing is holding on to Christ through thick and thin, holding on to Christ through it all, even when it seems impossible for us to hold on to Christ, and that we do that for each other, that we bring each other through. That's the impossible thing that God can do for you and me, that Jesus does for you and me in that. And he does that for you and me, through you and me, doesn't he? That we get to take on that burden to bring others and make sure that they are solid and understand and know their Lord, that they have a relationship with him. This morning, I want to ask you is, what is it that you're doubting about? What is it that you're struggling with? What is it that you don't feel assured of? What seems impossible to you in your relationship with Christ, in your walk with God, in your time here at Kibler, whatever that might be? What is it that you don't feel assured of? And my question to that is, why? Why are you struggling with that? Why are you struggling with that? Because I want to help you feel assured. We want to help you feel assured of that. We want to help you feel assured that you can go before him, that you can have relationship with him, that he's going to see you through that. He, just like Christ did with Peter, he wants to do the same for you. And he wants to do the same for you through you and me. And this morning, I want to tell you the first way to that assurance. The first way to be in a place where I know full well that Christ is with me, that Christ has affirmed me and established me, and he set me up, is to enter into those waters of baptism, to profess him, to enter into the waters of baptism, to die to ourself that we might be raised to the newness of life. If this morning you haven't made that decision, if that's not where you are in your process, that's the beginning of that assurance. And this morning, if you haven't made that decision, whatever we can do to talk with you, to study with you, to pray with you, whatever to help you make that decision, please let us know. But if there's anything else we can do for you, if there's any way we can walk with you to help you and assure you this morning, please let us know as we stand and we sing.